Okay. And we are good to go.
Okay, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. I've got some phone issues there. This is the December 16th, 2021 Watershed Board of Directors meeting. So first item is to do a roll call. So would you call the roll, please?
Yes. Director Gibson.
Here.
Director Russell.
Here.
Vice Chair Schmidt.
Here.
And Chair Bragman.
Here. Our next item is to adopt the agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
Move approval of the agenda. Second.
Okay, could we have a roll call, please?
Director Gibson.
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye.
Vice Chair Schmidt.
Aye.
And Chair Bragman.
Harry, I'm not sure, but I thought I saw a hand. I didn't know if there was a comment in that one.
Oh, aye. Is there any public comment on the agenda?
Yes, there are two. Larry Minikes. Mr. Minikes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I was actually going to speak at open time, so perhaps I'm a little too early. Nothing on the agenda, thank you.
That's coming up next.
It's actually this one.
Oh,
So should I be speaking?
well, wait a second. Are there any public comments about the agenda?
There are none.
Okay, so now we go to public comment and you're on, Larry.
Thank you so much. I'd like to speak to wildfire work and Measure A, and so a general misunderstanding within the public that we're trying to work to get more clear is monies are already going from Measure A. 20% of the monies from Measure A already go towards biodiversity work, fire prevention, and such. And what is going on with the MWPA, because there's questions as to how this is working, and it's important for the public to understand, is that they're using what we're discussing as a force multiplier, meaning that the open space is doing all their own environmental compliance because they're very comfortable doing that, and the MWPA then can spread their function further because they don't have to use the manpower for that, and they save on funding. And I believe we have there's a similar relationship with MMWD, and where I suppose you're doing your own environmental compliance and MWPA comes in, and there's that force multiplier effect. And it's important for that concept to be understood by the public as to how these relationships, these interrelationships are working, and how some of this work is getting done. And with that, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Roger Roberts. Go ahead, sir. Mr. Roberts?
I think I'm unmuted now.
Yes, sir.
You are.
Just a thought to share with you relative to watershed maintenance and wildfire risk and quality of water. I would urge that at least you study the issue of spending some of the money that you may get either from grant sources or from your own budget to do a strip of clearance for fire risk abutting the reservoirs. The reason why I think that makes sense is that it reduces the ability, or the chances rather, of muddy, turbid water getting into the reservoirs, which you really want to try to avoid. So I would ask that you at least study the possibility of spending some money on I don't know what the proper distance, 100 feet, 50 feet, surrounding the reservoirs to protect them from runoff risks associated with potential fires or existing turbid water flows. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further public comments.
All right, then let's move on to the first item on the calendar, which is to consider and approve the minutes of the Watershed Committee meeting of September 16th, 2021. Is there any public comment about, well, is there any board comment about the minutes? Is there any public comment about the minutes?
There are none.
Is there a motion to approve the minutes out there?
Move approval of the minutes.
We have a second?
Second.
Very good. Roll call, please.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell. Dr. Russell. Vice Chair Schmidt
Aye.
and Chair Bragman.
I'm actually going to abstain. I wasn't there.
Oh, that's right.
But if you need a vote to approve, I'll approve. So,
And I would think I would need Chair Russell, right? Molly?
okay,
If we want to have a affirmative vote.
okay.
It
Let's,
looks like he's coming on.
okay, good.
Director Russell, would you like to vote on the minutes, sir, from the September 16th Watershed meeting?
You're on.
You're on mute.
Let's see. Yeah, he's.
Yes, I'll vote
Okay.
yes.
All right,
Very
thank you,
good.
sir.
There we go.
Okay.
Right.
Thank
A lot of that, a lot of tension there. That was.
Wait till we get to the easy stuff.
Yeah. You did that on purpose. Okay, so the second item is the 2022-2023 draft 1 TAM work plan, Amendment 7 to the cooperative agreement. And who's going to be presenting that?
That's going to be me, Director Bragman. This is Sean Horn, Watershed Resources Manager with Marin Water. There's 2 recommendations for this item. One is for the Watershed Committee to review and refer for board approval the 2022-2023 1 TAM work plan. The second is to review and refer for board approval amendment number 7 to the cooperative agreement. Now, the 1 TAM work plan is something that staff brings to the board each year. There's one change to this year is we're going to a 2-year work plan. So we won't come back with this again for another 2 years. This is the partner agencies coming together each year to develop a work plan to prioritize the focus of the 1 TAM collaboration. And the work plan this year is built off of the strategic plan, which the board reviewed and adopted on March 5th of 2019. And the strategic plan outlines 6 kind of areas of collaboration and focus, that being landscape scale science and management, programs, projects, awareness and engagement, collective impact through philanthropy and investment. So the work plan is developed around those 6 organizational areas, and it does bring a lot of capacity and support to the district's programs. Specifically, it helps us expand the outreach that we do in regards to stewardship and citizens' activities on the watershed through volunteer and youth programs. It also supports a number of kind of key community science endeavors, such as measuring the health of the mountain and the peak health report that agency partners are currently working and developing. It also supports our Mount Tam early detection rapid response program, trying to attack some of these invasive plants early throughout the district's lands as well as surrounding jurisdictional lands, and then rare plant protection enhancement programs. Now, key projects that are supported through this work plan that influence the district specifically are expanding our forest restoration and fuel reduction work on the watershed through the development of strategy and collaborating cross-jurisdictionally, as well as the support for Azalea Hill Trail Project, which comes primarily in the form of communication and fundraising support. And this year, we've been extremely successful working through the 1 TAM collaborative on fundraising and bringing about a $3.5 million grant from CAL FIRE to support some of the fuel reduction work and forest restoration on the watershed. And 3.1 million of that will go towards contractor crews actually implementing work under our biodiversity fires and fuels integrated plan. So today, staff is recommending that the board or the Watershed Committee review and approve or recommend for approval the 1 TAM biannual work plan, as well as amendment number 7 to the cooperative agreement. And amendment number 7 is being developed in order to allow us to collaborate more robustly on grants and actually transfer some of the grant funding between agencies. And this is specifically needed for that CAL FIRE grant. OneTAM was the lead on the grant. And so now we need to establish this amendment in order to transfer those funds to the district to allow us to implement the work. So with that, I'll take any questions that you directors may have regarding the work plan.
Any questions from the board? Sean, is OneTAM working with Fire Safe Marin and the wildfire agency, the newly
MWPA. So yeah, all of the agencies are represented on the MWPA's technical advisory committee. And then also a subset of the agencies are on the Fire Safe Marin board. So that's how we collaborate, is through agency staff through OneTAM in that way.
So there's communication, coordination as far as, trying to set up opportunities to work together and that type of thing.
Absolutely correct.
Okay. And so I saw in the paper, the Ross Valley got $1 million grant. I'm not sure if it was from CAL FIRE. Is that part of the 3.1 million grant that's a separate grant?
That's going to be a separate grant. Yeah, this 3.1 million is just for district lands and implementing our BIFIP.
And as far as that Ross Valley grant, any of those funds go towards vegetation management in our property, I should say on our property?
No, they don't at this time.
Okay. Anything near us?
And as part of the Ross Valley planning that's going on, there are some projects being planned near us, and we'll be reviewing those as part of MWPA's technical advisory committee. So I think in the future, there will be work that abuts our lands, as well as potentially either aligns with the work that we're doing or is additional work on our lands.
So MWPA is the lead agency on that grant? Okay.
I'm not sure about that particular grant, Director Bragman, but MWPA is how we're all coordinating around that project.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions from the board? Any questions?
I have a question. On the budget, it shows a $50,000 income from events. What is that exactly? What's the nature of those events?
I believe those are the fundraising events that OneTAM does on an annual basis. They do a couple different, so they have donors who support to the OneTAM collaborative, and they do different events just for donors, as well as other fundraising efforts through events. I believe there's one coming up on January 5th around Bethune Marsh, and it'll be, part of that is getting donor support.
Okay.
Anyone else? Is there any public comment about this item?
There are none.
Okay. So thank you, Sean, for presenting that. And I guess, was this an information item?
This was a review and refer to a full board meeting. So that's what we're looking for.
Consensus to refer?
Correct.
Okay, I guess it's referred.
Yeah.
It is deemed referred. Okay. And next is the California Conservation Corps Forestry Fuels and Trails contract. And that's another one of yours, Sean.
I believe we have one right before that. Item number 3 is for award of contract number 1967 for forestry services. Carl Sanders is going to.
Okay, sorry,
Carl Sanders is going to take that.
Okay, sorry.
Good afternoon, Carl Sanders, Natural Resource Program Manager, Marin Water. This is a review and refer item for the regular board meeting to an award of contract 1967 forestry services to the Bay Area tree specialists. This is a $1,856,789 two-year contract that will replace an existing forestry contract that we terminated last season due to performance and contract breach of contract. Again, this is a two-year contract. It supports our BIFIP management actions, specifically those around fuels, forestry work, and weeds. We can extend it for 1-year increments after that, up to 4 years in total. As Sean had mentioned before this, we've got money budgeted for this through both internal capital funding, $380,000 per year, and with that CAL FIRE grant, approximately $600,000 per year to support this work in this particular contract.
Okay. And so, and this is a 2-year deal, and the recommendation is that the board authorize the general manager to execute any amendments up to 10%.
That is correct.
Okay. And as far as the last contractor, was that a different contractor?
Yes, absolutely. That contractor is, that contract was terminated, again, due to performance issues and breach of contract issues.
Okay, all right. Was this put out to bid?
Yes.
Okay,
So we had 3 bids. They Barrier Tree Specialist was the low bid by a significant amount, approximately $500,000. The other 2 contractors came in at above this bid amount. So
did we add any specifications to avoid a repetition of the last contract problems?
yes, we added additional language. I had legal review that, Sean reviewed that, but we did add additional language to avoid what occurred during that last contract.
Okay, that sounds good. Any other questions or comments by the board?
Is it required that this kind of contract goes out to bid?
Yes, at this dollar amount and for this type of work, yes, it was a closed public bid process.
My understanding was that for public, basically professional performance, I guess, that's not required. Wouldn't you characterize this? I think it's good that it went out to bid, don't get me wrong. But I just, for purposes of understanding here, it's our impression we were required to take it to bid.
If I may, I'm sorry, if I may, Director Gibson, this is what I would construe as a general services agreement, so not a professional services. And we do have a bid requirement. We would want to get the lowest dollar amount for general services.
Right.
So that is the standard process for us, and advisable, of course. And even with professional services, we would do an request for proposal, likely. It wouldn't be based on a low bid amount, but with a general service, we see those as fairly like for like.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Any public comment?
Yes, there are 2, Mr. Roger Roberts and Mr. Larry Minikes. Mr. Roberts, please.
Question, is there any focus in this contract on dealing with invasive species or sensitive habitat? I mean, what is the focus, and will those be part of the focus?
Yes, absolutely. A large portion of the labor on this contract will go toward French broom removal. Quite literally hundreds of acres and hundreds of manual labor hours are part of that contract to address French broom for both a habitat and fuels objectives.
Thank you, Mr.
And sensitive habitat as well?
Sensitive habitat, generally we're working within what we call forestry work and or woodland restoration work, and this contract will also address that. For other sensitive habitats such as grasslands, we do work with other contractors and agencies to help us on those sites. But this particular contract focuses on forestry and woodlands.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. Mr. Minikes, please.
The usual suspects. In yesterday's MWPA operations meeting, this is very timely. They've been doing the same thing. They've been putting their projects out to bid and then going with a bid. But what they're moving toward now is going to more, I may say it wrong, incorrectly, a programmatic way of doing this, so that every time a project comes up, they'll have the vendors there, they'll know what the vendor is charging, and they can just plug that into their calculation. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is perhaps there's an opportunity to collaborate on this, because you're probably using a lot of the same vendors, and it may be an opportunity to actually lower everyone's cost if everyone is sort of collaborating. And that's my comment. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
and it's a
you.
good one.
There
Is
are
that
no more
it?
speakers. Yes.
Okay. Okay, so this is a review and refer. Is there agreement that this should get referred to the board by everybody?
Yep.
Silence is consent. Okay, it's referred. Silence is complicity.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Carl. So next is item 4, which is the CCC Forestry Fuels and Trails contract. Is that you, Sean?
That's back to me, sir.
Okay.
Sean Horn, Watershed Resources Manager. The recommended action for this item is to review and refer to a future monthly board meeting to approve a contract with the California Conservation Corps for $210,000. This is a contract that we set up on an annual basis under a cooperative agreement that we have with the CCC. They're a major workforce and source of labor for the district to implement some of our fuel reduction and forestry work, as well as invasive plant management. They assist us with trail brushing and other vegetation management activities throughout the watershed, and from time to time will step in to support us for trail projects. The benefit of this crew is that they come with a 13-person crew and they go on spikes for 10 days. So we have them on the watershed for 7 spikes under this contract. And in the last couple of years, they've been camping at the old Girl Scouts camp on the watershed next to the Sky Oaks Ranger Station. And that would be another component of this contract this year that helps to reduce commute costs and time. It also just improves the efficiency of the crew's work on the watershed, and also gives them a great experience to appreciate and connect with the watershed. So
Sure.
that's the item today, and we're just requesting a recommendation to refer this to a full board meeting for approval.
Okay. Questions from the board or comments? Jack?
Yeah, I have a question. Not specifically related to this, but I haven't heard for a while about the Youth to Work group, which does similar work. Are we still active with them? Do we have that? You know, the project that puts young men to work out there.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
So Youth to Work, we're still coordinating with them. I think they've become a big working hand for MWPA's projects. And so they haven't had enough capacity in the last year to assist us, but we are coordinating and continuing to discuss opportunities for those kind of crews.
Okay, good. And I think all of the board supports that. Just, you know, not only because of the work it does for us, but that it's very good for the community as well. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's more local hire, I think.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. I think it's Marin High School kids. Yeah.
So any other questions from the board? How about public comment?
Yes, Mr. Roger Roberts, please.
Sean, just a matter of curiosity, with this contract, what does that translate into number of acres that are treated or cleared by these workers?
Yeah, it's hard to translate this particular contract into a number of acres because they do vary the type of activities that they do for the watershed. As part of our annual BIFIP reporting, we are reporting out the number of acres that are completed and the costs of each of those management actions. So that's where I'd point you to look at just how we're doing things globally. For a specific contract, we are tracking what they complete on the watershed, and happy to report out on that at a future meeting if that's of interest.
Thank you.
There are no further public comments.
Okay, so I guess consensus to refer this to the board for approval then. All right, so item 5, the other power-driven mobility device item. And I'm not sure who's presenting. Is that Sean? Are you going to take that one on too?
That's going to be me again. So good afternoon, Sean Horn, Watershed Resource Manager. The recommended action for this item is for the Watershed Committee to review and refer proposed ordinance number 45457 to implement pursuant to a new administrative policy procedures for the use of other power-driven mobility devices on the watershed, including an OPDM registration program for e-bikes class 1. The second recommendation is for the Watershed Committee to review and refer the proposed repeal of Board Policy 31 and 31.1 to be replaced by a new administrative policy for ADA grievance processes. And that's just clarifying the process and how it would work. So despite the district's current code for 99.04.01 in our motor vehicle code, e-bikes are currently prohibited as a motorized vehicle on the watershed. We've been going through a robust review process over the last 2 years, starting with a public community meeting, followed by a community advisory committee who reviewed this issue, followed by individual stakeholder meetings to discuss different options for how to move forward in regards to access to the watershed for e-bikes. Out of that process, there wasn't consensus on how to move forward. However, there was recognition that under ADA, there are requirements and e-bikes are an acceptable and approved mode under other power-driven mobility devices. That's very similar to what other land management agencies have been grappling with and adopting to allow for some activities to allow for e-bikes for folks who need mobility disability devices. So staff is proposing that the district develop another power-driven mobility device policy for the district's watershed lands and put that into place through a registration program. That registration program would be administered at the Sky Oaks Ranger Station and would be set up to allow for rangers to inspect the e-bikes that are being proposed for use to ensure that they're class 1 and they have a registration sticker that's supplied by the manufacturer and they haven't been modified. It would also require that the interested individual fill out a form stating that they are using this as a other power-driven mobility device on the watershed. They would have to present a handicap placard or some other form of state or federal ID that demonstrates their compliance with ADA, or provide verbal recommendation that they are using this as another power-driven mobility device. And that verbal could not be contradicted by observable fact. So as part of this, there's attachment 1 is ordinance 457. That's an amendment to the motor vehicle.
Sean, what does that mean? It couldn't be controverted by an observable fact. What are you saying?
Well, if they were to go running out the door, that would be an observable fact that said they didn't have a mobility. So those kind of things. What we're talking about.
That might get a little tricky. I mean, if they got the sticker, you know, I don't know. That's kind of getting a little touchy there to make it a subjective decision like that.
I think,
I think we might want to just leave it with the.
Isn't this is standard language, right?
This is standard ADA language.
Yeah,
And
so
so
I think that's what it means.
Okay.
It is consistent with the regulations implementing the allowance for other power-driven mobility devices that have been promulgated by the federal government.
And that's why it's there.
Yeah. And then the final step of the registration process they'd have to fill out a form, and that form would require them to sign the form under penalty of perjury that they are using an e-bike or other power-driven mobility device for a mobility disability. So attachment number 1 to this staff report is the ordinance that we're proposing, which amends the vehicle code and adds an exemption for other power-driven mobility devices to be used on the watershed. The second attachment is the administrative procedures and policy that have been developed to guide staff's registration program for other power-driven mobility devices. And this defines the type of devices that would be allowed to be used, provides standards and authorized areas of use. It also outlines the registration process that would be put in place to help facilitate this program. Finally, it notes that there would be penalty for use of e-bikes that were not registered as e-bikes as other power-driven mobility devices. And then finally, attachment 5 of this staff report provides the form that we'd be asking folks who are trying to register their bikes under this registration program to fill out. And then the second recommended action for this is to adopt a new grievance policy. And so the final attachments 4 and 5 provide the board policy 31 that we're trying to replace with the updated grievance procedures. And that just provides clarity around how someone would come to the district to file a grievance should they feel that they need to. So again, this is a robust process that's been brought through a review with our community. There's different approaches that have been proposed, and this is a first step. And as part of our CAC process, we did identify a long-term recreation management planning process that the district is initiating. So we're currently working on that and bringing on a consultant to help with the district to address a number of different watershed-related recreational activities. And as part of that, a segment will be to continue to review and discuss the different modes that are being thought of and used on the watershed. So one of those will be continue to think about e-bike access. And this is a first step to comply with ADA regulations and develop another power-driven mobility device policy for the district's watershed lands. So with that, I'll take any questions that the board might have. You're on mute, Director Bragman.
Had a reboot, so sorry about that. I'm sure there's some questions and comments from the board on this one. So who wants to start? Okay, I guess I'll start. So what was the impetus to bring this forward before the recreation management plan was done or begun, for that matter?
Well, we're looking at this as a distinct issue to bring us into compliance with the federal statute, distinct from the recreation plan that's going to consider a whole range of factors of, trail conflicts and ways we can think about things different and access for different sorts of users. That really was not, this was just saying we do need to get a policy in place that recognizes our compliance and the way we comply with ADA.
Okay. And are any of these, our sister agencies implementing a similar policy?
Yeah, so State Parks currently has another power-driven mobility device policy similar to this. It doesn't have a registration program. There is within Marin County Parks Open Space District a ADA access plan that provides what kind of the guidelines around what they allow for other power-driven mobility devices as well. And Golden Gate National Recreation Area is currently continuing to review how they're going to grapple with e-bikes. They allowed them generally on areas open for bicycles, and that's continuing to be reviewed.
Okay, but no registration from GGNRA.
That's correct. No other organization has a registration program.
And are any of the other agencies limiting access to, I guess is it class 1 e-bikes, pedal assist e-bikes?
The other agencies have various ordinances around that. The guidance, though, does start to become more restrictive around speed for other power-driven mobility devices. So in some cases, they are reducing speed to 5 miles an hour, the use of another power-driven mobility device.
Wow. Okay. I mean, and was there any consideration of adding some kind of access for elderly riders?
That is something. Do you want to take it, Ben?
Yeah. That has come up certainly, and that was put aside in this context because it's not part of the American Disability Act. However, we do anticipate, as we talk about access and all of the related issues as part of the recreation plan, that could be, that would likely come up and be part of the discussion and what we'd be bringing to the board.
Okay. I mean, honestly, it just seems to me it should be more coordinated with the recreation. I mean, I do appreciate and actually support the access for, ADA, including some of the less obvious types of disabilities that benefit from this OPMD e-bike access. We heard some really compelling public comments during the Citizens Advisory Committee, I thought. So I just want to make sure those less obvious disabilities would qualify under these criteria, which Molly, I don't know if you helped draft it, but it does seem to have some broad documentation parameters, which would permit less than, obvious disabilities from getting the benefit.
No, I appreciate that, Chair Bregman. And really, we've looked at this and worked on it as a, very narrowly tailored process for the district to take a step towards just ADA compliance with a focus on ADA compliance and safety. So ADA requirements for those with mobility disabilities, specifically mobility disabilities, are entitled to accommodations for other power-driven mobility devices. So we took a look at the regs, we took a look at the ADA, we took a look at the limited available case law to do our best to bring forward a narrowly tailored amendment to the code, a policy that we thought was in compliance, and it's really focused on other power-driven mobility devices. We do see that as, in this case, incorporating the allowance for e-bikes under certain circumstances with a focus on and doing so safely in accordance with the ADA and safely. So it's not intended to really address the broader issues that I think that the district is still working on and considering as far as the use of e-bikes on Watershed. But it's really, like I said, just a tailored effort to memorialize, document the district's compliance with the ADA on this particular issue. So I don't know if that helps address the—
No, it does. I mean, so in a sense, it's almost a defensive move to provide accommodation. But the thing, just to get more specific, was there was comment from a couple members about autistic youth who benefit from using this type of device. So, their mobility is not physical, it's cognitive. And I just want to make sure that that type of disability accommodation is permissible, because I think it's important.
Well, I know, I appreciate the comment. And I think that we have drafted it. So we have the code revision that would simply generically allow other power-driven mobility devices in compliance with Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So we'll continue to evaluate what that incorporates and what that allows under current law. My understanding is currently it is a mobility disability. But there's, an evolution of sometimes of case law or regulations, and we would keep our fingers very closely on the pulse of anything that would change. We've prepared an administrative policy to give us that flexibility and latitude to make adjustments as we see that may be happening in the law with the ADA. And then also we have a grievance process, so that will also allow kind of a double check. If people feel like they have been turned away inappropriately, there is a process now where they can come forward with a complaint. We have a complaint process 60 days after they've experienced something that they think is not in compliance with ADA. That will give the district additional time to take a look and a deeper look at those as they're raised.
If I could just pursue the point. The testimony that we received was such that the autistic youth do have mobility problems that can be accommodated by an e-bike. In other words, ordinarily, they cannot run, they cannot walk, they cannot ride a bike. In that watershed, yes, they get a power assist because of the cognitive limitations or challenges or differences, and I just think that type of broader understanding of mobility limitations needs to be included in our approval process. So,
Director Bregman, I'm looking at the application that we're asking folks to sign, and right, the third one is this verbal representation not contradicted. Yeah. And the certification is they have a mobility disability. It doesn't say a physical mobility disability.
That's right.
Okay, good read.
Right,
Hey,
and I
those-
think what I was trying to say in brief is that we'll certainly allow what the ADA allows, and we'll be cognizant of the fact that that's not always a narrow window. I think that's appropriate.
Right. I just think we have to kind of broaden our definitions a little bit to provide the accommodations to the community. With that, I will see if the other board members want to weigh in. Folks?
Have we considered registration of all bicycles and not just e-bikes? Or that yet to come?
That certainly has been brought up from a number of folks. I think this is a good step because it allows us to understand better what that would be and how to have an efficient registration process. And some have joked that, you know, a registration process for all the bikes, we're creating a mini DMV. So this is really an opportunity to learn a registration process, and that would be another issue I would expect that will come up in the rec plan, and, you know, will be considered, we'll bring to the board as part of, you know, a whole range of issues that'll come up.
Yeah. Any other comments? Is there any public comment?
Yeah, hold on a second. Larry.
I have a, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Larry, if you want.
Well, about your comment about a mini DMV, realize that California has 55 million vehicles registered. I don't think we need to worry about being a mini DMV.
I'm just going to say, you know, I know that that a lot of folks might. I think it's really important to understand what we're doing here and what we're not doing. What we are doing, I think, is coming into what we saw as a need to comply with the American Disabilities Act. It's not it's not meant to be a decision at a broader scale about access in any way. And we genuinely, I think, well, I'll say for myself that this is I know it's a really important issue, and it's one that I think is made better when we do the whole recreation plan. And so I just want folks to understand that this is not a step that's made to make a decision, a preemptive decision about access into the future. That really needs to happen, I think, in the context of the larger planning process. And if we were to make a preemptive decision now in any direction, that would undermine the process that we intend to be able to allow people to have input in the recreation planning process. So this is not meant to preempt. It is meant to just comply with the law as we see it and not try to carry it in any distance further than that at this time. And so I hope folks will understand that, and I'm glad that we're taking the appropriate step.
Yeah, and I think that's good explanation and context. Are there any penalties in this statute or this ordinance?
The only penalties would be those that are existing for violations of our code. So we're not changing any of those. We're not adding any of those. We're simply relying on the status quo that's already in our code. This is again, just narrow focus on making an accommodation allowance for use, not, so the prohibition that already exists and the violation that would cause and the penalties that would flow, none of those are changing at this point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way I can really support it is to consider it as facilitating accommodation, really. I don't want to restrict accommodation or inhibit accommodation. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. So, you know, in that regard, I think it is a step forward because it provides a path that the folks in the community that need the accommodation, it's a clear path and can be followed and encouraged, really. So I think that would be a good thing. Is there any other board comment So can we, let's open it up for the public. Is there
Sure.
some comment on it?
There are several. The first two, the phone number ending in 370, and then Larry Minickies, please. Go ahead, person ending in 370.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I heard the entire discussion about the e-bikes, and they are motorcycles. They're not really e-bikes, and they can do speeds of 35 miles an hour plus, and will probably get faster. And there's lots of blind corners up in the watershed, and that's going to put hikers and bikers at risk. So I see the ADA. It will get exploited just like handicap placards do with cars. But one of the key points I heard brought up was the 5 mile per hour limit for power-driven devices. And I think that's the only way this would work from a safety standpoint for both hikers and bikers, is somehow have a limit on the speeds, because it will be exploited. There will be people up there that aren't really ADAs that will be speeding and putting others at risk. It's inevitably going to happen. So one idea is, you just allow handicap wheelchairs to go up. It doesn't have to be a motorcycle. But anyway, it's the speed that's going to be the issue, and it's going to be the people that exploit the ADA that are going to be the issue. And that's my point.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Minickies, please.
Well, I'm going to wear several hats here. One is I'm of age. Another one is I don't need to talk about personal medical conditions, but I definitely have a bad knee. And so I can see a point where this falls in with me. I had a conversation recently with an 82-year-old man talking about his opportunity now to ride. And these are the people that are going to fall, that I think Larry Bragman is addressing, that are falling into sort of a gray area here. They can't really get up there well or as far as they want. They're not quite disabled, unless you want to call getting older kind of that way. But perhaps there's a middle road here where you can add one more box to this, which is per doctor's recommendation, which is almost like you get for a lot of things these days. And if they bring a doctor's recommendation that, look, the gentleman needs, or the lady needs this because they're not disabled, or they don't really, they fall in that gray area where they really do need legitimately this kind of accommodation. And I'm looking at this from looking for reasonable recreational controls going down the path here, where we're not leaving those people out that legitimately should be able to have that opportunity, and yet somehow having some control so it doesn't get completely out of hand like it appears to be getting. Thank you.
Thank you. Next two speakers, Roger Roberts, then Nona Dennis, please. Mr. Roberts?
Yes, what I heard, and I maybe heard incorrectly, is that some of the other land agencies on Mount Tam have not conformed to ADA compliance at this point. And so what do you do if somebody doesn't enter our open space from an access point of the water district, but they're coming over from a state park, or they're coming over from Marin open space lands? So what is being done about having consistency in application of ADA law with the use of our trails, which pass through several land agencies?
Question. Might be something for one TAM take up.
Mhm.
Any other
Yeah, there are
comment.
several.
Okay.
Mr. Roberts, were you done with your question?
Yes,
Okay,
I think that issue needs to be addressed, that's all.
all right,
And
thank you. All
yeah, thank you.
right, Ms. Dennis?
Yes, can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, what Roger just said, of course, has always been an issue. That if we have different regulations on different public lands, we go into a state of confusion. And there are some differences, obviously. But I want to comment on a couple of things. One is that I was on the CAC for e-bikes, and we were very explicitly kept from discussing the ADA issue. Although we brought it up on a number of occasions, we said, yes, it's relevant. We need to really talk about it. So at least this brings some kind of clarity. I like the idea that registration is required, although it's going to be extremely hard to enforce. And because, as Roger said, people are coming in and out of other public lands and won't know that, there will have to be some kind of signage. Anyway, it's going to be hard to administer, but at least there's some clarity in what you're proposing. It may be temporary. It depends entirely on what comes out of the recreation plan. But for the time being, I can't object to it. I'm representing really my own opinion here. I haven't discussed this with Marine Conservation League people yet. But it's a beginning. I am concerned about the speed, the 15-mile-an-hour speed, which is often surpassed. The county parks department in their inclusive access plan has restricted e-bikes as OPMDs, whatever, yeah, right. And have included them in the speed restriction that they assign to other devices such as electric wheelchairs. In other words, 6 miles an hour. There have been complaints by bikes who say they can't even, stay upright on a 6 mile an hour speeding bike. But nonetheless, there is a difference. So I for the time being, I'm going to say, okay, it's okay. It's going to be hard to administer. It's going to be costly. It may not work, but at least in writing, there's some clarity. Thank you.
The next two speakers, or three, I'm sorry, Bob Middlestat, Erica Lovejoy, then Mike Raphael. So Mr. Middlestat, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Look, we've all been over this so often. We've been at this for 3 or 4 years that the board has been studying the e-bike issue. I think to put in context what we're talking about now, if the board had actually followed the CAC's recommendations and adopted the staff's recommendation from a year ago, e-bikes would be allowed already, and we wouldn't need to worry about an accommodation under the ADA. So I think we're putting the cart before the horse. I think we've got this backwards, but I'm a realist and I know where we are now. And so it does make sense for the staff to do what they've done in coming up with an ADA proposal. I think we should follow the GGNRA, which has decided for several years to allow e-bikes on most of their fire roads. And I've submitted to the board Exhibit 20 to the GGNRA superintendent's compendium on e-bikes, and it's a map that shows where they're allowed on GGNRA, and that's worked fine as far as I know. I think that's a great model for you all. But let me get finally to 2 questions and then a comment on the senior citizens. The 2 questions are, I'm assuming this is not intended to be the last word, and it will not be cited as a reason to extend the ban on e-bikes if and when the recreation management plan is done. And the other thing is, I want to know if this is intended to signal a change in the enforcement policy. Because if it is, that's a very big deal. And so I think we should have clarity on those 2 issues. And then finally, I want to say a word, if I may, about the senior citizen exception. Larry Minikes, thank you very much for your suggestion about a doctor's recommendation. I think that's positive, but I also think a senior citizen exception is necessary because of this. What we're going to be asked to certify that we have a mobility disability is something that the lawyers and the courts have trouble figuring out exactly what that is. We're going to be asked to certify under penalty of perjury and face 4 years in prison, as the form reminds us, if we get it wrong. I think the way around that, given that I don't think you all want to be in the business of trying to interpret these and having the narrowest possible interpretation, I think the way around that and the way to accommodate most of the e-bike riders on the mountain now is to have a senior citizen exemption. It solves a lot of problems. It makes enforcement a lot easier, and it's consistent with a lot of what a lot of government entities and businesses do in giving allowances to senior citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next two speakers, Erica Lovejoy, then Miles Raphael. Ms. Lovejoy? Or I'm sorry, I apologize. It's Bob Middlestead. I apologize. Go ahead, sir.
He was the prior speaker.
Do I get to go again?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Okay, sorry, I was trying. Sorry, Ms. Lovejoy, I apologize.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks much. I appreciate the opportunity to comment here. I would urge this committee and board not to move this proposal forward to the full board, because I think it actually really sets quite a problematic precedent. I think it would actually create more complexity for people with existing ADA legal status, because they would have to go get another permit and jump through hoops. I think it would be better if the district just recognized existing law by allowing folks, most of these people already have some sort of documentation or ADA placard, and this would simply make them have to jump through another hoop. I also agree very much with the other speakers who and board members who talk about, other non-visible conditions. It's not just age and being older. I am definitely part of the older community, but there are a number of different physical and health issues that one can't see. And, if folks heart rate gets too high, autoimmune issues, all sorts of problems. And frankly, an e-bike has given me access and really renewed my ability to be out and ride my bike with other people and not by myself. So I think the idea of a permitting system creates a new regulatory burden. It's for staff, taxpayers have to pay for it. I think that class 1 e-bikes should be allowed and just simply have to follow the same rules that all other bicycles have to follow. And I'm hopeful that you delay this decision until after the recreation management planning process has been completed, because I do believe it's the cart before the horse. And I wanted to mention, I sent an email to the board this morning with more detailed comments. I'd appreciate it if you would consider them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Raphael?
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Hornstein for his comments for why they're doing this now as opposed to waiting. As far as the other agencies and their lack of registration, I'd like you to give some consideration to that. But I'm not opposed to the registration. In case you guys forgot, I've been before you before, and my wife was on the committee, and I am significantly disabled, if you don't remember, and I want to say that openly on the record, because so many people get up on this and speak and they aren't disabled, so they don't really know what it is to need this device. Okay, and then if we are going to go ahead and do the registration, I prefer that it be at Nellen, or that you consider allowing it through bicycle shops like Sunshine and Mike's and Trek, and the shops where it's easier for a person with disabilities to get in and present their bicycle, as opposed to having us get it all the way up through Fairfax and up into Sky Oaks, because that's where I think you're talking about. And then I just wanted to say, this 35 miles an hour statement is ridiculous for a class 1 e-bike. I know you were offered to ride them, but if you went out and tried to ride them, yes, downhill, they can travel at that speed, but I challenge any of you to do that. You know, even a highly skilled rider going downhill, okay, I see it, 33 seconds. That a highly skilled downhill rider doesn't average those speeds, you know, on fire roads. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We have 5 more speakers. The first 3, James Muzan, Mickey Allison, and Ann Spalding, please. Mr. Muzan?
Hi there. First off, can you hear me?
Yes.
Say thank you for hearing my comment. I'm a 15-year-old Tam High student, and I just wanted to say a few things. I'm on the mountain bike team at my school, and I have a really close friend who rides for Redwood High School, and she was born with conditions that prohibit her from raising her heart rate, and her entire family are avid cyclists and nature enjoyers, and having an e-bike and using that e-bike as a tool allows her to not only enjoy the watershed, which she would not be able to do otherwise, as well as participate with the Redwood cycling team, just with practices. She cannot race, but it's much more an enjoyment factor for her. And I just wanted to say that if we did use that 5 mile an hour limit, that opportunity would be restricted for her, because again, with the being able to even stay on a bike upright at 5 miles an hour would be challenging in certain situations. And so I think that the same 15 mile an hour limit should be carried over, because for any sort of social riding, which I think is a lot of the usage of e-bikes, would just not be possible. And then I also want to say that I think that the senior citizen, some sort of senior citizen act should also be in place, because it's a huge group of people who otherwise cannot use the mountain, and it opens a lot of windows for people to utilize the mountain. And then also injury recovery. This year I shattered my ankle while mountain biking, and on my way back into the sport, about 6 months later, riding an e-bike just for a few weeks really allowed me to get back outside, and it was a huge opportunity for me. And so I think that there should also be temporary usages for people recovering from injuries and other special situations. Thank you.
Thank you. Mickey Allison, please.
Yes, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I am 78, almost 79. I have two tears in my right cruciate ligament that are 3/4 tears, no cartilage. I also have a damage to my left knee. I'm a hiker, I'm not a biker, and there's a reason for it. One, my cousin got wiped out literally and has brain damage because he rode a little too fast at the same age as me. And he is now suffering, not able to ride a bike at all. And this really concerns me because I have fallen off a bike a couple of times, and so I would not go on those trails. And yet I can hike 6-8 miles without a problem. I do it all the time. So the question I have is, if you are disabled or have this accommodation, sorry, and you are out there and you get a flat, you fall, or your battery runs out, how are you going to get that bike back? Okay, because some will ride on their own. That's going to be a cost to you to try and get these people out, unless they have to automatically say that they will pay to get you out. There's costs involved with this. These bikes are, in order to have enforcement, which is critical, because I've gotten run over almost by bikes coming around blind corners. I've gotten to the point where I don't walk on your lands anymore, because I've run into people on single track trails who come down at me, and I've had to flatten myself against the wall, the hillside. And I had one guy, and I slid down the hill, and he didn't stop. He didn't stop to help me get out, and I had to crawl up the bloody hill. So there needs to be enforcement on these trails, not just on the fire roads, but also on the single track trails. How are you going to pay for that? It seems to me you need to put a user fee that works for walkers, horseback riders, bikers, e-bikers. And it goes to be licensed so that if they want to rent a bike, the bike shop actually deals with that. The other thing, having only a label on one side of the bike, if it was on the wrong side of the bike and that bike almost did me in, I wouldn't be able to read it. Maybe there needs to be, and this needs to wait a little bit until they can put actual trackers in each bike so that you can see what bike is where at what time. So a person could say, this is what happened to me here, and you could actually track down the bike. I mean, seriously, 5 years right now at this time, no way. Maybe 1-2 years is a trial, but nothing more than that. Please, please, please. Because I'd love to get back on MMWD lands. I love that area. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Spalding, please.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I want to just take a moment to recognize to Mickey that that must have been very scary to be run off the hill by a biker, and I apologize that that happened to you. I myself am a biker and a hiker, and would hope that all of us can use the lands together. I wanted to just come back a moment to what I believe Bob Middlestat said, which was the two concerns that I have around this is, since this is coming before the recreation plan, will there be components of this that influence that recreation plan in a way that wasn't intended? And so as you build the permitting process, as you build the enforcing process, those are going to be processes that are in place for, at the moment, this narrow use. But I worry that that narrow use and those processes being put in place, people starting to get used to them, money and resources dedicated to them are going to influence the recreation plan. And so while I personally would like to see the access opened up completely, and I laud you opening it up for ADA, I know it's important to be compliant. My concern is that the regulation needed to make that work, one, is going to be a huge resource drain in order to be able to do the permitting process and do any sort of enforcement between people who have the permit and don't. And in that process, you're going to be expanding the enforcement ahead of having made a decision that that will be the enforcement going forward. And the other thing I just wanted to put forward, I'm sorry that I haven't read the entire plan, but I've heard several different mile per hour limits mentioned on this call. So I think maybe it might be useful to just clarify what are the actual limits that are being brought forward in this plan. Thank you.
Thank you. The next, I'm sorry, the last three speakers, 4 digits 2176, Tom Boss and Andrew Levine. The digits, please. 2176.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Hi, it's 2176, better known as Stephen DeLapp. I want to commend you for doing this. I think all of the comments have been really helpful and thoughtful, and have pointed out that there are some flaws in this policy, but I would urge you not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough, and to go ahead and proceed with this policy. I speak as somebody who would benefit from it. I'm an avid hiker who can't hike. I'm an avid biker who can't bike. And this would really allow me and many other people to have access that I don't have now. Certainly, I was most concerned about the registration policy, because I'm sitting here thinking, how am I going to get, a 60 or 70 or an 80-pound bike up to Fairfax and up through Fairfax and up to the ranger station, and then have to sort of consider, well, do I look disabled enough that it's not, what was the language, other obvious appearance or something. And as one of the directors pointed out, what the heck does that mean? And I think legal counsel sort of gave some ways to consider that. So I think all of these comments about speed limits, access, all of that are worth considering, but I really hope that you as directors will proceed with the policy and actually, rather than think of it as a narrow, we're just going to comply as a defensive mode, look at it as a way to open it up and comply with all disabilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tom Boss, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Tom Boss with Marin County Bicycle Coalition, and really appreciate the e-bikes. They're a challenge at times, and a year ago, as has been pointed out, we were close to pushing forward with a pilot program, which would have, as one speaker said, may not have required this action, or at least in the way that it's being presented. I've heard conflicting comments on whether this policy as it's written would be specific just to people with disabilities, or potentially could guide future policies. And as somebody pointed out, the potentially influence the rec plan, which hasn't even gotten underway. I've heard from a lot of our members, and I think that what's being presented here today needs some work, and I would encourage you to delay approving the policy as is, maybe getting a little more feedback from stakeholders. But I do see potential bleed of this policy that's earmarked for one specific population, potentially having unthought of impacts on other cyclists. So yeah, I feel bad for Ben and the staff. They've been working a lot on this over the years. But yeah, I'm concerned that what's being presented here today could have could have impacts beyond what we're trying to address right here.
Thank you. And Mr. Levine.
Yes, hello. I'm Andrew Levine. I live in Mill Valley. I am disabled and have my placard and everything. Nobody checks my equipment. When I park at Marin Municipal Facility and use the handicapped space, I don't have to prove anything. I hang my placard and I'm done. If I borrow someone else's car, I can do that. If somebody from out of town with a handicap placard wants to park, they can do that. The idea of holding people with a disability to a higher standard than you're holding the general public is in conflict with the ADA. That a person who needs a motor on their bike to ride alongside their spouse must go through an onerous process is in violation of the ADA itself. And as your documents, the agenda says right on it, when it's talking about does this need CEQA guidance, says this isn't changing the use of e-bikes on district lands, as they are already required under ADA. So e-bikes are already allowed on district lands because they're as an ADA, for ADA compliance. So throwing up hoops for disabled people to go through is the definition of uneven treatment, which is the whole point of the ADA. So I just would say, I would argue that you consider that. It takes away the ability of a person who doesn't have the money to have a bike, but is renting one or borrowing one. They cannot use these public facilities. So I just think it's, you can see from the comments, it's very clearly a mechanism to try to get bikes off the mountain, but at the loss of access for disabled folks. So I would suggest you resolve the cycling issues. They're independent of the ADA issues. And in fact, I believe under the ADA, bikes can ride on, a disabled person with an e-bike can ride on a trail that doesn't normally allow bikes. Because if that's what somebody needs to get access to that, and it doesn't create a safety hazard, then they need to get that. So just be careful. I believe the district is moving towards something that's in direct violation of both the letter and spirit of the ADA. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I hope you guys make some good choices here. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay. Some really good comments and thought-provoking ones too. So this is on for referral to the entire board. Do we have a board comment on referring this or not?
I personally think that the comments along the line that we should do the master plan first and then fit this in subsequently.
Yeah, okay. The last comment definitely gave me pause about moving forward with it.
You know, I guess I look to Molly on this one. I mean, you know, we're, you know, truly to preempt any So I just want to, I recognize that there's a lot of concerns about this setting precedents, and I tried to speak to that earlier, but delay out of concern of what it might mean in the future, I think is not a basis for us not coming into compliance as quickly as we think we need to.
And if there's an interest in having me speak to some of the issues, I would just say that, you know, I heard the last speaker and, you know, thoughtful comments. It's certainly not the intent of this process to be onerous. It is not unusual for public agencies to have a reasonable accommodation request. In this case, where e-bikes are not otherwise permitted on the watershed, accommodation to allow the use of an e-bike as another power-driven mobility device, I think is a reasonable accommodation under the ADA. We're making sure that we're updating our grievance complaint process so that if there is concern about location or being able to access the registration process, all of those things can be submitted to the district for consideration and for action. So I hope that answers the question. Certainly we are not disallowing the use of e-bikes under the ADA now on the watershed. This is a formalization so that the public is aware that the district has taken this position, and we have a process that focuses on compliance with the ADA and safety for all of those on the watershed. But of course, it's the board's decision to make.
I think maybe it's worth just mentioning, like we're in the recreation management plan is not going to be completed for, I don't know, Sean, can you look into a crystal ball about how far off we would be talking about completing that. And that means delaying a decision until that point in time. That's a concern of mine. If this was putting off for 30 days or something like that, or a couple of months even, but we're talking obviously longer than that. Can you comment, Sean, to the time frame that you estimate?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at least a year to get through the recreation planning process, to have a informative and deep engagement process with stakeholders, and more likely 18 months until we have a draft plan.
Okay. Director Russell, do you have any comments on this item?
That's an interesting question, Larry. I'm debating in my head. It seems to me that we need to be in compliance with the federal law. I think in some ways we may be playing ostrich here, that we can pretend that the problem doesn't exist, but it's there. And, if we don't see it, it doesn't happen. I'm still confused about what form of enforcement will be used, if any, on this activity. So I got mixed thoughts right now. I don't really have a clear direction. I think we're all kind of muddling a little bit here.
Yeah.
I wanted to also take the opportunity, and Sean can probably do this better than I can, but to clarify the speed limit question for folks, that the current administrative policy says that other power-driven mobility devices would be limited to 5 miles per hour, except for Class 1 e-bikes, which would have to follow the speed limits set for other bicycles on the watershed. So I think it's important just to make sure the public's clear on what is currently in the proposed policy. And then as far as enforcement, I'm sure Sean can also speak to that. My first thought is always to educating people about what the rules are, and to helping folks understand the rules and why we have them, rather than carrying a big stick. And I think I understand that would be the first step, but I'll defer to Sean on the details.
Unfortunately, that makes me even more confused. What are these other vehicles that are limited to 5 miles an hour?
So other power-driven mobility devices that could be allowed, motorized wheelchairs, motorized scooters, as long as they're in compliance with the administrative guidance that we're putting out there. So this is for all other power-driven mobility devices.
Can a motorized wheelchair even go 5 miles an hour?
I don't know.
I don't either. That's what I'm saying. I think it's just confusing rather than clarifying. I'm not criticizing you, Molly. I'm just talking about the policy.
Understood. We're certainly here to take feedback.
Okay, so I don't think there's consensus yet to move this forward. I appreciate the impetus to institute a policy, but I'm really concerned about creating more barriers to the disabled community. I'd like to know more about enforcement. I know Dr. Schmidt indicated he's up there, I'm up there. I'm sure probably all of us get up there. Right now, I'd say 25% of the bikes are e-bikes, and that's kind of a conservative estimate. Of those, I really have no idea who would be qualified under this policy. I mean, just surface appearance, I would say most are not disabled, but as we heard, there's many disabilities that don't manifest themselves, on the surface. So my feeling is, as frustrating as it may be for staff to kind of stir the pot on this further, at this point, I think it should be coordinated with a recreation plan. I think, I'd like to hear from the ranger staff what they have to say about this, because it really presents some pretty difficult enforcement issues. The bikes are getting more and more difficult to even discern which is a class 1 or a higher class. I mean, that's the one thing I agree with on the proposal, like without hesitation. There's going to be no other way for us to restrict the bikes to class 1 without some kind of sticker, registration, something. So, you know, at some point, we're going to have to deal with that very thorny enforcement issue. So my feeling is we need to kind of stay with the status quo, but I think we really should just let's just poll the board and see what the members individually, whether they want to move it forward or recommend it to a formal board hearing. So
Director Bragman, I just have a couple comments if I could.
Sure.
I think in some of the comments, there are opportunities were we to bring this back to address them. For example, I thought it was some good comments of, you know, this is a big mountain and a broad service area to only register in Sky Oaks could be impactful. Well, we can solve that. And what we could have days where there's registration here, we could have days in the different communities where we do registration. So I think some of the kind of burdens that came across at first look, what we could refine that. On enforcement, and I'm just trying to clarify, not, you know, one way or another. On enforcement, I'm struggling with that because we are not bringing any additional enforcement approach or conditions or rules or regulations in context of this policy. We have what we have on the books. Would it give us more ability to identify who is registered, who's not, and help educate folks that if you're disabled, you do need to register. If you aren't, so it would really open up opportunities in the context of education. And yes, there is enforcement on all our regulations. Of course, you know, we try and not wield, as the general counsel said, a big stick, right? We try and educate and encourage and work with our community. So enforcement is not in any way shifting. And I do think there's ways around some of the issues that have been identified, but, you know, look forward to where the board lands.
Yeah. Okay.
Chair Bragman, there is one person that wanted, she hadn't spoken yet, but would like to know if she can speak for public comment.
Sure.
Laura Cheriton, please. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, as you know, I hike on the mountain regularly, and I'm really concerned about what's still happening out there as a legacy hiker there for 40-something years. And I went out about a month ago up the Hogback. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. And then I went up the Miller, came back down the Hogback. And as I was coming down the Hogback, it was a Saturday morning, there were 3 mountain bikers. You couldn't tell if they had electric bikes or not, but they were riding up the Hogback. And I'm not sure exactly of the slope, but it's about 50%. Huh? I heard Larry.
Yeah, I was just, that's very steep.
It's
probably not that steep.
Incredibly steep. It couldn't really be any steeper. That was actually the last hike that I took for almost a month because I tore my ACL. I'm sorry, not my ACL. I tore my meniscus on my left leg. But my point is, as these guys were riding up, I said to them, "You're not supposed to be on this." And their response was, "We know, but we're going to do it anyway because we like it and nothing's going to stop us." So when your legal counsel starts saying we have to educate them, I have a problem because I don't think it's possible to educate people who have that kind of an attitude. And anyway, that was the last big hike I took, and I meant to report it, and I'm reporting it now. And thank you.
Okay.
It's not getting better there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just want to add one more thing. I did take pictures of not the guys riding up, but a group of tourists or trekkers, and they were going up right after these guys were. So they would have been in a bad situation too. Thanks. There were at least 20 people.
That's it.
Okay. Okay, so I guess we'll close public comment now. So, my informal take on it is that we're pretty divided, if that, about moving this forward. And so I'm just going to say I would not recommend this move forward at this point. I mean, I think sort of a middle road might be to bring it back to our next watershed in 90 days, see where we're at on the rec plan, see if we can iron out some of the wrinkles, and go from there. But it really, the whole way technology really does present some very difficult regulatory issues, in my opinion. And I must say, public comment has broadened my view about the issue, and also just seeing how they operate in reality has broadened my view about the issue. So there's plus and minus. So how does that sound to the rest of the board? Kick the
I have
can?
several thoughts,
Go
Larry.
ahead. Go ahead.
I have said this numerous times. The only smart part of a horse or a bicycle is the human that's on top of it. And the comments that were just made about the guys going up the hill, I think we can rest assured that if it really is that steep, those were e-bikes, not regular bikes. And we have to get through to the smart part, like I say, whether it's a horse or a bicycle. I think a proposal would be to proceed with the registration of the bicycles. I don't see any downside to that. And it gives us a feel for how many we're talking about. It also puts some identification on the bicycles. Perhaps, I have proposed RFID tags for a long time. There's a lot of issues with it, but at least it gives a positive way to read the number of the bicycle. I don't think the cost of including an RFID tag is very much. But my proposal would be to wait for the implementation along your lines, Larry. I agree with that. I think we need a little more time. But tied to that wait, I would like today to come out with a firm commitment to when the recreational plan will start. I don't see any reason to be delaying this. I think Sean, I agree with his estimates. I think a year or 18 months is a reasonable length of time, including the public participation. I don't think, I heard somebody say 5 years, I don't think we need to wait 5 years. I think it's time to move forward. And I think there's ways of dealing with the issue that will fall out in the future. But first we need to get the plan. And like I say, I would proceed with registering the bikes just to see what kind of response we get.
Director Russell, in terms of the timing, we've gone out for an RFP, and we'll be bringing the staff recommendation for the consultant, I believe, in January. Is that right, Sean?
Yeah, that's correct, Ben.
Yeah, and then we'll proceed in accordance with the scope immediately following that, assuming the board authorizes the contract.
That's very helpful. I'm glad. I wish it had been mentioned before. Maybe that gives us the kind of a date to make things happen. That's good.
Right now, so I'm not sure what I missed.
They said that we went out for an RFP, and we have a meeting in January or they have a meeting in January to look over the responses to the RFP to get a consultant to write the plan.
The recreation plan.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So where does that leave us now?
Based on what I'm hearing, to share, it does seem, I think staff can consider the feedback and comments we've gotten. I haven't yet kind of identified with clarity what we would do to refine it at this point to bring it back versus the integration as part of the plan. So based on the comments, I'm thinking, unless the board suggests otherwise, that is the direction we'd be going, is not think about this distinct ADA and integrate this into the broader access and users in context of the fuller effort. But we could do either way.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm also open to putting it over to the next Watershed meeting, at least for further discussion. So I don't think there's consensus now to move it forward. So I don't think we should torture it any further. I think all efforts were made in good faith, and this is a tough one. So we're gonna have to struggle through this together, unfortunately.
I just want to.
Well, actually, it's probably good. Misery does love company. So
I just want to say that I agree that this is not an easy issue. I want to think of the fact that staff, that I'm not getting any clear idea from this conversation what we would even ask staff to do differently in this situation, and I'm mindful of the incredible load that they have been under to deal with the drought and to address all the other really pressing issues. This is one, but I don't want I don't want to waste anybody's time, particularly our staff or the people who attend these meetings. I know this is a challenging issue, but I'm really compelled by what I perceive as a sense that we have an obligation under the ADA to provide access. And maybe I'm over understanding that, or think that is more clear than it seems to me. But I don't, if I'm correct in that, I don't feel comfortable waiting 12 to 18 months to come into compliance.
So
some form or fashion. So if we're going to continue to explore this, then I would like us to get clear about what it is that we're going to explore so that we can take action and be efficient with our efforts.
Well, Director Schmidt, if I may quickly speak to the first issue that you raised. We are not disallowing folks on the watershed who represent that they have an ADA need from using their e-bikes currently. It is being allowed. It is not formally identified as allowed in our code, and there is no formal process in place to ferret out who is using it, e-bike as an other power-driven mobility device versus not. But we are not violating the Americans with Disabilities Act. So, but maybe that will give you some comfort in considering the discussion that the other board members are putting forward. But our effort was simply to have it be formalized so that it was clear, looking for clarity to the public, looking for clarity as to how it gets implemented on the watershed. So we're not telling people that they must leave, and if they're representing that they have a need for that under the ADA, my understanding is that we are allowing that currently.
That's correct.
Do our signs indicate that there's ADA exceptions or no?
No, our signs do not indicate that, but if they're stopped for educational purposes and they, communicate that, then they're allowed to move on freely.
If there's any kind of a stop or question or that type of thing. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I'll just say then, knowing that we in an unclear way are in compliance, that is good to know. I will say that the lack of clarity and the length of which, even extending far past my start on the board almost now just a year ago, it hasn't helped this situation. And has, I think, only kind of increased tension around understanding what is going to happen around management of our watershed from a recreational standpoint. Bikes, e-bikes, hiking, fishing, all the access issues. So if the decision is to hold off until the plan is created, then let's be clear about that and get back to work on the other things that we can take action on.
Okay. So sounds like we're going to table it for right now and move on to the next item on the agenda. Okay. Item 6 is the Lagunitas Creek Watershed Enhancement Plan. Sean, is that your presentation?
Director Bragman, we're going to bring in Jonathan Kaler to give a presentation on the Lagunitas Restoration Project.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Afternoon, directors. Jonathan Kaler, Fisheries Program Manager with Marin Water, and I'll start sharing my screen now, which hopefully you can see. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. So I'm going to give you an update on a project we've been working on for the past year and a half in Lagunitas Creek. And this is a map of the Lagunitas Creek watershed. And essentially the area I'm talking about here, San Geronimo Creek coming in, is really here below Kent Lake, Peters Dam, down through Samuel P. Taylor State Park.
Wow.
In 2020, Marin Water got a Prop 68 grant, and this was intended to identify good places for restoration, essentially the areas of Lagunitas Creek with the highest potential habitat and those that had good landowner cooperation. So we're collaborating here mostly with state parks, but also with Department of Fish and Wildlife and the National Marine Fisheries Service. And the grant was really intended to identify sort of the highest priority sections of Lagunitas Creek and then come up with conceptual design, so kind of loose ideas of where we could actually implement habitat restoration. And over the last year and a half, we've been working really collaboratively with the Lagunitas TAC and with the agencies, a lot of iterative back and forth, and we've come up with what we feel are two really good high priority reaches of Lagunitas that would benefit from the kinds of approaches I'll show you in a second here. But these reaches were really intended to represent the areas where we think we can get the most bang for our buck. And there's 13 sites total. There's 7 sites in the upper reach. So this section here, hopefully you can see my cursor just to orient you where we are. This is Kent Lake, Peters Dam, like the Leo Cronin fish viewing area would be right here by Shafter Bridge, San Geronimo coming in. And essentially we're talking about improving habitat conditions in that section, what we call the canyon reach of Lagunitas, and then a little further down through Camp Taylor in Samuel P. Taylor State Park, all the way really down to the end of the park there. And the way that these sites have been set up is they're really independent, but they're also grouped together. And I think that is going to give us the most flexibility in terms of how we implement those over time, in terms of, you know, getting grant funding, and then also just being able to use our own internal staff and budgets to maintain these structures. So this is a cartoon from our consultant, ESA. They've been working really closely. They're a really well-respected firm that does a lot of these kinds of in-stream habitat designs and engineering projects. And this is essentially a kind of a conceptual idea of what we're trying to achieve. You can see that much of Lagunitas Creek is actually quite straight in those reaches, and it doesn't have a whole lot of complexity. And through the addition of large wood, essentially trying to mimic fallen trees that would naturally be in the system, and then careful placement of gravel, which is currently being held back by Kent Lake, by Peters Dam, we're trying to recreate what makes the best habitat. And you can see it takes it from essentially a long, relatively linear, featureless kind of stream channel to a much more sinuous, complex, varied kind of habitat. I'm a big fan of pictures. Pictures are definitely worth 1,000 words. And this is what we're sort of currently faced with on the left here. You can see this kind of simple, low quality habitat. The water's relatively shallow. These are what we call glides, long, shallow, not very favorable habitat for coho or steelhead, or really any other salmonid. And then you see here on the right, this is what we're really trying to shoot for. This is actually a structure that the district installed many years ago as part of our ongoing stream restoration program. And this one's doing a great job. So the idea is that there are several of these structures that were put in place that are doing great. And we're trying to fill in essentially the other portions of the creek with new additional features to more or less connect those good quality habitat areas that are currently existing. What's good about this one on the right, just quickly, is that those logs and wood are creating a lot of complexity in terms of water velocity, water depth, cover, hiding areas for both adults and juveniles. And then they're also, this is also creating a spawning riffle. So that's one thing that's really lacking in this reach. It's just an area where fish could actually spawn. So in terms of where we are on this project, I mentioned we started this back in 2020. The consultant ESA has just put out draft 30% designs. These are pretty conceptual. And you can see here, this is what they look like. This was in your packet, so maybe you've had a chance to review them, but it provides details on sort of the approximate number of structures that are proposed at each one of these discrete sites, how we would access the channel in terms of getting equipment down in the channel, volumes, rough approximate volumes and numbers of materials involved. And those have been developed for all 13 of those sites. Our grant is complete in March 2022. So those plans are essentially out for review right now by Department of Fish and Wildlife, by the Lagunitas TAC and other stakeholders, and they'll be finalized in 2022, in March of 2022. We are currently, as in due tomorrow, we are currently seeking funding to take these 30% designs to the 100% level, which is, you know, full construction ready, stamped, engineered drawings. So we're applying for a Department of Fish and Wildlife North Coast Coho Recovery Program grant, which is part of their Cutting the Green Tape program. And the idea is that once those plans, and then that also includes going through CEQA, once those are complete, we would then seek grant funding to individually implement these projects. And they range in cost, and that will all be, really all those details will be worked out during the next phase. And, you know, we're thinking 2024 at the earliest, but, you know, for the next several years, this is kind of our long-term plan. So that's what I have, and recognize we're long on time, so I'll be happy to answer any questions, but thank you for getting the update.
Yeah, Jonathan, I was really struck, am I not muted? Good. By the map, the first map. I have not seen a map that is so explicitly illustrates the whole lower. So that is really cool. Why did you call the second one a cartoon? That was another question I had. Because I like cartoons, but I've never seen one like that.
I guess I'm used to working with engineers. They consider that very cartoonish. They want very specific values there.
Okay. Third question is, how are we doing with our adaptive management this year with all the dynamic rain, and how do the fish counts look?
I think we are very much on track with complying with our temporary urgency change petition, where we've been really lucky with the flow. We're meeting weekly with the agencies, monthly with the Lagunitas TAC to give them updates. We've seen a big push of fish into the system, less spawning. This most recent rain, Eric and our other crews are out counting those fish. And so I would expect once the water clears up, we're going to see a lot of fish spawning, but essentially those early rains, they moved into the system and we're holding, and then we'll expect them to start spawning soon.
And so the temporary use change petition, I mean, with the recent rain, is that really operative anymore, or is that, are we complying with that, or has that been adapted off the plate?
We bypassed, there was a period in November where we would have been allowed to maintain a very low flow, and essentially Mother Nature gave us a gift of very high natural flows, and we maintained, essentially we went straight to our winter base flow of 16 CFS. So we really have been conservative and maintained the flows at those higher winter flows.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So we kind of caught a break, I guess. And then the last question is, what is the planning horizon? I missed that. Is this 2023? These additional projects are going to be shovel ready, or?
Yeah, I think at the earliest we're talking implementation in 2024. That's the optimist in me speaking. So it takes a while to go through the final design and environmental review process. So we're shooting for 2024.
And are these grant funded, or are these,
yes,
these are all grant funded? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's kind of, those are my questions. Rest of the board, questions, comments, praise?
Praise, yeah, good work. I mean, it's all the way around. The project is good. The work I'm seeing is good. And the fact that you're getting a good grant response to, that, I mean, that doesn't get better.
Yeah. Yeah.
A couple quick questions. Jonathan, what's the, how much are we asking for the coho recovery grant?
$870,000.
Okay. There's a $15 million budget, so it's a significant ask in a small pool. Going to the designs, a question that I have is, I mean, I love this work, that a question I have though is, with these projects implemented, how close would that take us to having the desired level of large wood loading that we want to see in a restored reach? And let me tell you why I'm asking this question is, I think that there's in doing this work myself, there's this question of, do you treat once, or do you keep going back and treating repeatedly over time? And I think there's pros and cons to both, but I'm just wondering where if this project, these series of projects as envisioned now were implemented, would you see that as nearly meeting the full treatment for large wood in this reach that we would hope for?
Yes. Yeah, so that was actually one of the major considerations by ESA, the design consultant, was they looked at the recommendations of the regional board when they looked at wood loading in the system, and essentially these designs get us to that level.
Great, awesome. That's what I was hoping you were going to say.
Yeah.
Let's go put some logs in the river.
Okay, good pointed question there. Any other comments? Any public comment?
There are none.
This is really kind of inspiring stuff, I think, for all of us, and I really appreciate it. It really kind of gets us in touch with what we've got and maybe what we lost and what we're trying to get back. So it's really good stuff. And I didn't get a chance to dive, but really appreciate Monty's take on it and everything you're doing, Jonathan and the rest of the staff. So any other comments from the board before we adjourn? Okay, thank you all. I guess we are adjourned, and thanks again.
See you soon.
See you soon.